We are drafting in the Underdog Big Board over on UnderdogFantasy.com. $10 entry, $200,000 to first prize, and we are waiting here 35 seconds till the draft kicks off. But Shawn, we've drawn the 107. If you are signing up though over at Underdog Fantasy, you can use code RotoViz to get yourself a 100% sign-up bonus up to $100. We did a draft a couple of weeks ago, Shawn. We talked about some of the maybe preferential landing spots based on how maybe some of the tiers are, the opportunity to get two maybe of the, not the exact top of the market wide receivers, but maybe two wide receivers in those first two picks to see how that opens up the rest of the draft. How are you feeling here, having landed with the 107 to kick things off? And also, as we draft, we do a podcast. It gives us a little bit of time to reflect on what's happening rather than the rapid fire starter end of the rounds here.
Yeah, it does. So I think that part is fun. It's always good to be in the middle where you can get some values as opposed to have to anticipate the runs. I do think at the beginning right now is the best spot, basically, right? Because not only are you going to get a shot at McCaffrey, Lamb, Hill, Chase, some of those guys, but right now with Rice and Olave sitting, early in the third, you could potentially get two of those three players, or those two players, to go with your top guy. To have a three-player start like that, I think is absolutely electric. We're not going to have that possibility, but Colm, we're going to be able to do some pretty cool things here from the middle and see how our overall build works. Tyreek Hill does fall to the 5th pick, which is kind of interesting. Bijan goes at 104. We're probably going to be staring at Jefferson, Hall, or Amon-Ra St. Brown, maybe Puka as an outside shot at a contender. Colm, which of those guys are you most interested in, and which do you also think best fits the build? Well, we no longer have to worry about the running back option with Hall going. It's Jefferson, St. Brown, Puka. Yeah,
so obviously with Jefferson and depending on the quarterback situation, I think Jefferson's still the play to go with here at this particular point. But, I was kind of thinking who would be available at this point of the draft, and I was kind of happy with any of the wide receivers from Jefferson, Puka, St. Brown, and then AJ Brown. Kind of hoping that maybe Garrett Wilson maybe sneaks back. I don't think it's going to happen back to us here in the second round. Then you're into the kind of Nico Collins group. But the way they have gone in this draft is Jefferson, St. Brown, AJ Brown, and Puka Nacua. I probably would go with Jefferson, Amon-Ra, Nacua, and then Brown. So I wouldn't be changing it that much. But in terms of the rankings for those players, I think getting Jefferson at the 107, there's obviously as I mentioned, who is his quarterback? It's obviously not Kirk Cousins, but from the 101 to the 107, last year, the 101 kind of consideration, how much do you think he should be getting discounted based on those concerns with quarterback? And then how are you splitting up those other four, which I have pretty close together after?
Yeah, I think it's a big problem, right? Because you're not just going from Kirk Cousins to a lesser starter. You're going to either a clear-cut, lousy backup in Sam Darnold, or you're going in all likelihood to one of the weaker rookies. JJ McCarthy has some pretty intriguing peripherals, and yet to go from being like the weak link or the guy who's not relied on the national championship team to then being put in a position where he's asked to really get the necessary volume to guys like Jefferson and Addison. He's going to be surrounded with a lot more talent than he was at Michigan, which is not always the case with these top guys. And yet I certainly do think that, Jefferson for me goes from the easy 101 to being a difficult pick ahead of guys like St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, even Puka there. Colm, as we come back around, Jonathan Taylor goes one pick ahead of us. I think that he would have been interesting. Echan is the next guy up here. But the way that this sort of boils down, I do like the idea of continuing to load up at receivers. What do you think about reaching for Rashee Rice here?
Yeah, I'm up for that. That was a player I was going to ask about, because you and Ben recorded on Stealing Bananas last week, talking quite a bit extensively about Rice and Marquise Brown and the situation with the Kansas City Chiefs. So I have felt that I've been too excited about Rice heading into the season, even towards the end of last season. And I was interested to see if that was a point where maybe you would be wanting to push him to see if he's an option in the third round. But his ADP at the moment is the kind of 301 range, so wouldn't likely get back to us, at the 307. But it was kind of between him and Achan for me. And I do think that when you're drafting these and the way ADP is shaken out, you really get nailed if you're not getting those wide receivers at this point. Lots of wide receivers still available and may make it back to us, but Achan's still available after we pick. Ayuk goes, then Josh Allen, and then we'll see what happens over the next picks. The other thing with Ayuk, still some conversations going on around potential offseason trades with Ayuk and where he could end up. Pittsburgh Steelers been kind of linked in with some of those conversations. So I feel like there's a lot of questions around this particular range from the mid-second round on with a lot of these wide receivers. Even you get into the likes of a Dell who's going in the third round, but obviously coming back from his injury. You get Stephon Diggs, another year older. There's just lots of changing pieces. DJ Moore, who's going in this kind of range, who hasn't gone off the board yet, obviously now being paired up with Keenan Allen in Chicago. So just lots of question marks around this range. I know we took Rice, but those other names, are you comfortable with them? I feel like out of that list after Rice, Drake London might be the next one that I'm most comfortable with, but how are you feeling out of that zone of wide receivers?
Yeah, I think Drake London is probably the next most interesting player, even though he's still got a lot to prove at the NFL level. When you look at the names that you mentioned, I don't think you feel comfortable, taking a shot at any of those guys and saying he's definitely not going to pan out. The players are simply too good to look at it from that perspective. But the circumstances for all of them are pretty discouraging. And so when you look at that, I kind of prefer the third round wide receivers to the second round wide receivers, but I do want to get a receiver in most cases. Once Kyren Williams and Jonathan Taylor are gone, you're probably just chasing points at the running back position. And I think it's weak enough in the middle of that second round that I even drafted Josh Allen the other day, despite the fact that late elite quarterbacks are pretty obviously the way to play it this season. It's so easy to get to that quarterback position. Colm, we're back up here in the third, and our guy Jaylen Waddle is sitting there. Is he the guy that you want?
He's the answer. Yeah. He was the player I was waiting to see if he snuck through. I had my backup options and the likes of Dell, who we talked about. Even maybe you start to consideration Sam Laporta, but that was the player I wanted to get back. We did talk about him on one of our shows earlier this week, and I think in the third round, it's a really appropriate price, I think, but I think of the players going in this range, he's the one that I see that has the highest upside. I will say I think Dell has a lot of upside, but just that injury knocks him down a little bit from that. So we've started off with, I think, a pretty nice start. We get Justin Jefferson, and then we get some of the young wide receivers and Rice and Waddle. I think I'm through 3 rounds to have those. And I know we talk about this quite a bit, Shawn, in terms of player targets. There's obviously 21 player. My maths is not working today. There's 36 players going off the board and those opening 3 rounds. But the number of players that we're actually looking to target is probably the first round. There's more names, but you're probably in I would say 20 picks of players that you would actually want to have on your roster. So to have 3 of those guys, I think is a pretty strong start. From this point forward, Shawn, into that 4th round, is there any opportunities you've been seeing with your drafts where, last year we talked about running backs possibly in that range? How's things setting up for you in these drafts at the moment? Is it to continue with the wide receivers through this stretch, or is there any running backs in here that are of interest at price?
Well, the other part about getting one of those early picks is that you, in addition to the great selections at the end of the second, early in the third, you also have this possibility of going with Zay Flowers end of the 4th and Trey McBride early in the 5th. To take them at our pick in round 4, you're going to have to reach a little by ADP. That's not necessarily a huge problem, but they're probably not going to get back. And those are the 2 guys that I have ranked as the clear-cut options around this range. Unlike last season, we're not really seeing the dynamic running backs go at prices that are very clear discounts. And so when you look at it from that perspective, and you also think about the fact that you've got better wide receiver options, some sexier picks that you could make in these rounds, I think 0 RB is a very clear-cut approach, at least at this point in the draft. So Colm, we are back up. Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, probably the 3 guys we'd be looking at. Wide receiver, do you have a preference?
Not hugely strong between either 3, so I'll let you split the difference here.
Let's go ahead and get that T. Higgins share. We can
I
grab a
love
couple of our.
I'm very pleased when I can, say that it's not my decision, but I thought Shawn might have wanted to go with Cooper Kupp there. Let's hear the case on Higgins. And the other thing, just to point out, I wanted to mention that between rounds 4 and 6, so those 3 rounds, there is only 10 running backs currently by ADP going off the board this year. So it's there's not a huge amount of running back movement in those zones.
If you start at the end of the draft and you get a good wide receiver start, maybe a Garrett Wilson, Nico Collins, or something to that effect, then coming back in round 3, I think Travis Etienne is pretty interesting. But otherwise, as we mentioned, all of these running backs until maybe you get a Kenneth Walker. I'm optimistic that the Seahawks, I should say, will have fixed some of their offensive issues from last season. To have that much talent and to be that pedestrian offensively, I think was one of the big disappointments of 2023. You get the new offensive coordinator. There are always questions about how that college style will translate to the NFL. Is the coordinator going to be able to make the necessary adjustments to keep the dynamic parts of the offensive scheme, but to add the additional sophistication you need to make that work at the NFL level? But I think that if we get that, Walker could be this other guy kind of in this range who is interesting. He's somebody we could potentially look at in the 5th if we wanted. But again, the receivers here are the guys that we really have as targets. Colm, one of the things that would have been interesting, I think, would have been to grab Patrick Mahomes to go with Rice and to potentially add another Chiefs receiver, specifically there, looking at Marquise Brown coming back through. He does go off, but Zay Flowers is within 1 pick of us. He is the top guy by ADP. I do expect him to go here, and then I expect it to be a difficult decision for us based on the other guys who have been snapped up. If we don't get Flowers, who are you looking at as the next best option?
Well, Shawn, we get Flowers. I was going to start to mention potentially Kenneth Walker or Jordan Addison. That would give us a second Minnesota. The problem with Minnesota then is you're going to have to speculate on who the quarterback is if you wanted to complete that particular stack. I do think you started to mention your thoughts on the tight end process of trying to get 2 of the top 9, I believe you said, and you are in that range now where it becomes a little bit difficult. Mark Andrews went off the board after our selection. We'll be coming back again, but Dalton, Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, they're usually going in that round 6 range. So that is where we'll be picking next. And I think both of those become viable for the tight ends we'd probably be looking at here. George Kittle goes in that range as well, but I think that we would have other potential alternatives to him. You've added JSN and Marquise Brown to the queue. So it is going to be a little bit tricky. Joe Burrow could come into the conversation to pair it with T. Higgins. So the stacking element of this team could already become a little bit tricky. I like the players, but we'll see if we can finesse that into it as well. But I would feel like the next pickup here, if it comes back in the right way, would likely be Kincaid or Pitts. But at the moment, we are at pick 62. Kenneth Walker, usually he just goes off the board. I was about to say pick 58. He would have also had to come into consideration just for the ADP. The 2 tight ends, Shawn, with Kincaid and Pitts, as Pitts did go off the board. So how are you feeling here about Kincaid as the selection?
Yeah, I think this is a no-brainer. I think he's going to be right there in the mix to be the leading receiver for the Buffalo Bills in 2024. I think he's going to have a massive breakout season, score a lot of touchdowns. You're going to always be a little pressed to beat someone like a Stephon Diggs. If Diggs doesn't do it, you would anticipate it's because they make some other type of move with a rookie receiver. You have a wide receiver depth chart right now that is interesting, but not that loaded with Diggs and then Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. But
how strongly on that one? Obviously, we have other players. There, JSN and Marquise Brown, who I mentioned, Brian Thomas in the queue. The one there that would have maybe been the challenge would have been, we're talking about the stacking element. Joe Burrow is the next quarterback by ADP, along with Dak Prescott, that would usually be selected. We are 9 picks away. Was there any hesitation there with Kincaid versus Joe Burrow?
No, I don't think so. I do expect Higgins to remain with the Bengals, but we're going to have a variety of different options, especially with these early drafts. I'm looking to build the most powerful teams possible. I want to get as much value as we can with each of the selections. one of the things we're looking at here, obviously, is, is there any chance that Burrow will come through the Jamar Chase drafter that comes up in a couple of picks? But if he doesn't, and we're able to have JSN fall to us, that would be a great consolation prize. Marquise Brown did go off the board at the 609, and so we didn't get the option there. I think we can always come back and simply take Brock Bowers with this pick also. He's going toward the end of round 7. He probably won't get back to us in round 8, and he is tight end 9. So that's where the drop-off is. We will be able to get the 5 elite wide receivers and the 2 extremely dynamic tight ends if we go that route. And yeah, maybe we don't have all of the stacking options or the stacking elements set up, but there's so much else going well for this team. It's really my perfect build to have it set up that way. Now, Bowers does go 7-5, so we won't get him. That is unfortunate. We're now kind of waiting to see if JSN could get through one more pick here. It'd be great to have a second time where the player we've been targeting for a while does sneak through. The other option here, and the player that you could make a case for as being beyond that tight end 9 and still being pretty compelling, would be David Njoku. He goes about where our pick in the next round would be. Colm, do you have a player?
I would probably push Njoku, but I don't have a strong preference of ADP before that, unless you wanted to go with Jordan Love as the quarterback. But outside of that, I feel like Njoku would be the pick. I've put Shawn under pressure and we haven't got it done. I don't know, Shawn, tell me, is that by was that by design or?
Well, I don't think that Jordan Love fits this team as well as he would some other teams. Now, that being the case, he is a compelling pick there. Not necessarily
the main part with Love.
We didn't have anybody that we wanted really in between. There was no loss of a player in terms of a guy we expect to be drafted before our pick in round 8. So from that perspective, I do like going ahead and getting Njoku. But I think your mention there, the other player I was looking at, Colm, who has about the identical ADP with Njoku, is Jaylen Warren. If there's a winner with this year's Pittsburgh Steelers, I don't know that there will be, but it seems like Jaylen Warren is undervalued by a good round or 2.
This is a point where we really do get into a lot of running back options that I think are intriguing, which for setting up a 0 RB roster is what you want to have when you get into this particular zone of the draft. So we'll see what falls to us. One of my reasons there with the likes of a Jordan Love is, although Christian Watson did go a couple of picks after us, and we could have potentially looked at Watson and then take him with Love, but I'm not sold on Watson and his injury history and the other surrounding pieces of the Packers. But I feel like sometimes when you can backdoor stack teams with the players are available, there's a lot of Packers that are available after you would select the likes of Jordan Love. So it feels like a little bit of a, pull that emergency lever to be able to set a team up. But we are now, Shawn, 1 pick away. We do have the option of Warren potentially coming up here, the other players in the queue, Mostert, Williams. I see Shawn hasn't added DeAndre Swift to the queue. Still would be interested in the Swift, but we'll be hoping that would last a little bit later. So we are on the clock, Shawn. Warren would be my top running back option here if you want to go that way, unless you want to go with the quarterback option. But I think we go with the running back, and we hope that we might get a little bit lucky and see Love potentially slide on, and he goes in the next pick. So that ends that conversation.
I think that once Christian Watson is gone, and once we have Njoku and the need for, say, a Musgrave is lesser, then I don't think it makes as much sense to put him on there. So that's why, even though we discussed him and definitely considered him in round 7, we didn't take him in round 8. I like Jaylen Warren in part because getting the one running back there with extreme upside, it gives us a shot to, there have been some times in this draft where running backs have fallen a little bit. If Raheem Mostert would sneak through, that would be a lot of fun. Colm, I think that Javonte Williams has a chance to have a big bounce back season, another year removed from injury, and an offense that's going to be run heavy. I don't think
that feels like a clip that feels like a clip that I could just take now, and then we could just add it to next year, an episode of the podcast next year as well. Is that okay?
2025. No, if
Is this the year?
if we don't get the big season from him this season, it's definitely the end for Javonte Williams. One of the things that we're looking at with running backs is that you don't want to take a lot of running backs coming off of down seasons. Take guys with wide ranges of outcome that are based on other things like being unproven. We're going to have a lot of rookie options a little bit later. It makes more sense to try and chase those hot guys and get somebody before we have that cliff or that injury related end to the dynamism for them. And that's really the case there. I mean, it's very easy to think back to, chasing a David Johnson, chasing a Le'Veon Bell, and just never turning back around. The cliff for these guys, unfortunately, when they do hit it, is very real. The flip side of that is you have an old back like Mostert who is heavily discounted because of the age and because of the young star that he's paired up with. Colm, one of the reasons that zero RB works in 2024 beyond all of the structural advantages it gives you is simply the ability to get someone who's coming off of a massive touchdown season in a dynamic running offense like Mostert, a guy who is still one of the fastest players in the NFL. You love being able to add him and Warren. It's a case where they're the second most expensive backs on their team. And I mean, I like Achane to the point where I certainly would bet on him. And yet with the injury questions there, with the pedestrian talent that is Harris ahead of Warren, I mean, you have to like the chances of these two guys being the top scorers in running back committees where a lot of points are going to be available. The other thing that we're seeing here, Colm, is that QBs are 3 of the top 5 picks. I think in terms of ADP values right now, I think waiting at the QB position is something that is going to pan out for us. The question that we have, when we look at our specific guys, we don't know who the Minnesota quarterback is going to be. Patrick Mahomes is gone. Joe Burrow is gone. Lamar Jackson is gone. Waddle with Tua would be the pick there if you want to get a little bit of stacking action. Xavier Worthy is probably the most exciting pick that we're headed toward in this range. We can start to put some running backs in the queue for later as we bulk up that position. What are you thinking as we get here into the middle of round 10?
Well, I think I'm expecting Worthy did go. That was going to be the conversation if Worthy was still there. I feel like with the players that are going to be available here, Tua went 1 pick before us. I was about to say he was the obvious choice. So we don't have a clear and obvious choice now. And in terms of the players available, quarterbacks, I'm not interested in the ones that are there at that particular spot. So I'm looking towards running back here, Shawn, in terms of the options. You have quite a few rookies in there. Any preference? I always defer to Shawn on the rookie selections here.
Yeah, and this is a good spot to go ahead and just take Jonathan Brooks. I don't know what his health situation is going to be. Obviously, we don't know the landing spot. But when you're thinking about how you get that elite scoring punch a little bit later in the season, I want to take that upside shot there. If he were completely healthy, you wouldn't be able to get that price. And there are a variety of teams, Colm, that actually still need an RB1. We talk all the time about how weak this class is, and yet that just means there's no Bijan Robinson, there's no Jahmyr Gibbs at the very top. Plenty of talents that could easily break out and be the next, Philip Lindsay. It could be the next Kyron Williams in a year or two. You could be the next Alvin Kamara. I'm actually pretty enthusiastic about things you can do with this rookie class as long as you're aware of what the different risk-reward situations are and just don't get ahead of yourself in terms of thinking that you're definitely going to get more than is likely. You have to understand, again, the ranges, the risks, but don't be afraid to grab some guys from this class. Colm, looking here, we have Blake Corum go off the board. He's obviously been the running back star for the national champion Michigan Wolverines. The first rookie to go off the board was Trey Benson, who went at the 10:01, half a round before our selection there. It's interesting, Troy Franklin is the best ADP value at this juncture. He had a weird combine that I discussed at more length in my piece breaking down where I expect the rookie draft players to kind of pan out, play out when that comes to fruition. So he's someone who is interesting there. Colm, what are you thinking? You want to take that Troy Franklin value? Do you want to get a little bit of Jerry Jeudy here? I kind of sworn off of Jeudy, and then diving in the peripherals again, the track record, the background, the better situation.
Let's go for Jeudy.
I'm sadly back on the Jeudy train.
Sadly. Well, the Browns are on the Jeudy train between the trade and the money that they paid up, and there's a lot of questionable contracts, I think, at this point that we can say about the Cleveland Browns, but another one of them handed out to Jerry Jeudy, but who knows, maybe he can repay that faith. But when you're getting him in this particular draft now as our wide receiver 6, I think that's a very easy selection to make. A lot of running backs available there. The one thing when you're asking what am I thinking, looking through this, the remaining quarterback options that are going to be available, it's going to be a little bit tricky to patch this quarterback room together. A player that's usually not on my draft board at all is Deshaun Watson, but now with 2 Cleveland Browns and there may come into potential consideration. I don't know how you feel on that particular one, but it is going to be a case where we're going to need, I would say, 3 to 4 quarterbacks to finish out that. But looking at the extreme late options that we maybe will be looking to pair in there could be challenging. How are you feeling as you add some of the names to the quarterback queue? Is Deshaun Watson somebody who comes into play for you at this particular part of the conversation? I don't think we've ever drafted Deshaun Watson together, Shawn.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and take Franklin here to lock in that value. And again, it's not necessarily going to be a value when you look at the wider context of draft.
It's a long way after his regular ADP, though, at pick 138.
It is more than 2 rounds. So we'll see what continues to transpire there. In fact,
he usually goes around before Jerry Jeudy. He's wide receiver 53 in round 10 normally, and we get Jerry Jeudy exactly 1 round after at wide receiver 59. So we've done it in reverse order here.
And again, one of the things with the QBs, and especially this early in the season, especially with the extra 2 rounds, I guess I'm just not that worried about some of those other elements. I think we could take Deshaun Watson in this draft sort of purely to show how you would draft it with the Cleveland Browns. I mean, I think that if you draft Deshaun Watson, then you're putting the massive karmic hammer down on this particular team. Obviously, tactically, that should be your pick if you're looking at it purely from a
Shawn, do we want to win $200,000 or do we want to take a stand on principles? Which way there?
Well, again, I mean, you do bad things, you're not going to win $200,000. Colm, I'm looking at this New Orleans Saints team, and with the Week 18 performance from Kendre Miller, he's another guy who has certainly sucked me back in. When the article comes out talking about who the next Kyren Williams could be, I don't know. I mean, does his name also
begin with K?
There's a pretty good chance, right? So his ADP right now, 150. We're going to pick a couple of spots after that selection. I think that he's an interesting guy there. Marshawn Lloyd, one of these players, you could argue a little bit like a JJ McCarthy, just at a different position where you're wondering like where the volume was, because the production on the plays he got to be involved in was very, very impressive. He's somebody
just goes off the board.
Yeah, Kendre goes there. He goes to our competitor with whom we're fighting for Trey McBride, Drake London, Chris Olave. I mean, that's the draft.
Pretty good team. There. That's the draft we wanted to do.
Right, out of the 3 position there. So Justin Fields goes off the board. I do like him when he falls late. I think it's ludicrous to believe that Russell Wilson would be able to hold him off. I do think that Sam Howell is going to eventually win the job with Seattle. So I think that you can draft him in the 20th round when you're talking about guys that you can add in there late.
Are you looking at this team now as a 2 tight end team, or is there the possibility to add another? I'm just Freiermuth.
Well, there's some pretty deep guys. I don't think Freiermuth is one of them.
Okay.
This to me looks like Lloyd to get ourselves a 4th running back.
Yeah, no, I think at this point we can wait on quarterback. I don't think there's enough to separate some of these. Fields would have been somebody who I would have maybe pitched for, and even a Stafford if he had made it to us, but he didn't. Went 2 picks before, so we got some luck at the start, as we talked about with the Jaylen Waddle selection, for example. We waited and that worked out, but there's some of the ones in the last couple of rounds that just a couple of picks before us we have missed out on some of the potential targets that we would have liked to get. At the moment, we have 0 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 7 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. So I think we're probably close to set. Maybe one, depending on how things fall here, maybe one more wide receiver, but it's running back, quarterback, the 2 main concerns here as we move forward. Running back at the moment is Jaylen Warren, Mostert, so 2 veteran guys in there, but we also have Jonathan Brooks and Marshawn Lloyd as well. But there is some very intriguing late round options, and I'm sure people are excited to see where we go with that as the draft gets ready to get into its final stretch. Here we are at the start of the 14th round as we're running through these particular selections. We are 3 picks away, though, and at this point when we're sitting on the clock, I feel like speaking names is causing them to disappear off the board.
So, Colm, in the last handful of picks, we have Aaron Rodgers, Drake May, Will Levis go after our Marshawn Lloyd selection. You also have some really late receiver types in Michael Wilson, Roman Wilson, Demario Douglas, and Darnell Mooney. We'll go ahead and take Watson here so we can show how this type of build should work.
That was the plan all along, Shawn. Don't deny it.
It was definitely not the plan. But by refusing you on Jordan Love and backing into David Njoku and Jerry Jeudy, we do make that a viable path for us here. Braylon Allen goes 1 pick after ours. He's still a very controversial isn't exactly the right word, but I'm excited to see what he does at the NFL level. There are plenty of red flags that he didn't truly emerge after that elite freshman season. He's got the size, questions about the athleticism, questions about whether or not he can add as a receiver, and yet you contrast him with some of these backs who are theoretically going to be involved in their team's attack in a big way. The name that pops into my head right now, Gus Edwards. I mean, is Braylon Allen leaps and bounds better than Gus Edwards? That to me would be pretty clear cut. I'm excited for the possibility that he ends up on the right team. And Colm, one of the things here, as we're looking at some of the names available, a lot of these guys would look good in Chiefs red, thinking of a Bucky Irving, who obviously disappointed at the combine, looking at a Will Shipley, who disappointingly didn't participate, but then performed pretty well at his pro day. So you have the pro day asterisk, but he's someone who probably should be going a lot earlier than he is. We're up to pick 175. His ADP is outside the top 200, and yet still pretty appealing already at this juncture. I think it's never too early to take Wan'Dale Robinson and just add one more to this absolutely dominant wide receiver group that we have. That would be a little bit of a luxury pick, but he's somebody who would also
I think it might still
be here.
Yeah, I think it's like, now we are 3 picks away, so it may not work out, but I feel like it would still be the play for me based on the options that are available. The other thing I want to mention is that we've touched on it a few times, Shawn. The draft rate of the 103 is just, they are just taking they have to be either a RotoViz or a ship chaser, a legendary upset. There has to be some connection to the team that has been drafted there, but pretty strong squad. I was going to mention the possibility of a Roschon Johnson to add to the running back room, but as the thought entered my mind, he was selected off the board from that particular team. We are now 1 pick away. Looking at the options available, just for people who are on the audio side, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, Sam Howell as quarterback options, Wan'Dale Robinson, and then a huge amount of mainly rookie running backs, with some other names sprinkled in there. Then the likes of an Abanikanda, we have Tank Bigsby, J.K. Dobbins in there. So there is some other options, but mainly at the moment looking towards Wan'Dale to get that eighth wide receiver, which if this was a case that it didn't have the extra rounds, we probably wouldn't be pushing it as far as that. Shawn, J.K. Dobbins, I've mentioned this a few times about, we're waiting to see how the recovery happens and all, so on. But how are you feeling at this point with, obviously his ADP is, at basically a free level, but with how things have transpired in Baltimore this offseason and so on, with Derrick Henry now being there, what's your thoughts on Dobbins? Because I know it's obviously one of your guys from last season, which unfortunately ended with
Yeah, well, I mean, we just have absolutely no idea, right? We don't know how healthy he's going to be. We don't know where he's going to play. I mean, he looked awfully good with that Cowboys star on the helmet. If he is like 60% and signs a prove-it deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, then, I mean, from the very first practice, he'll be a lot more dynamic than Isaiah Pacheco. He's one of these guys where it's kind of hard to draft him until you get a little bit more of a sense of what the NFL is looking at there. And yet,
are they the sort of players
on a team, unless he's like really, really buried as the third or fourth guy, it seems to me that he will jump, even if people are not expecting him to be, more than, 60, 70%. He's too fun. He's been too good. And again, you think about the back half of the season, where is he going to be? Probably, I don't know. It's just so difficult to recover from that injury. So I shouldn't say probably, something that would be interesting. But I mean, it's a name that I continue to track because J.K. Dobbins was awfully good.
Yeah, it feels like just when you're at this, and the part here obviously is we're in a situation where we have 4 running backs, so taking that risk is maybe too much. Shawn has just moved him up the queue. I was going to mention it though. I feel like Daniel Jones might be the smart play here based on how the quarterback room is going, but Shawn is overtaking there. Will Shipley on the roster, Shawn. Hit me with the pitch for Brad Shipley here. Obviously, we need running backs as one of the pitches, but had you any interest there in Daniel Jones? No.
Yeah, no, I think he would be the next pick. So I'm hoping he comes back through. I was thinking, I mean, both of these guys are more 17th round picks, but once you get into this range, obviously anything could happen. We do have some other late round QB options, some guys who will probably start. It's interesting that, in the last week, the mock draft community has appeared to move Michael Penix ahead of Bo Nix. I think that that's a mistake for a variety of reasons. And yet, I mean, you don't get to choose where the guys go. So from that perspective, if Nix is the guy, it's like kind of the odd man out in this rookie group, it doesn't really help you that maybe he's the second best guy. He won't play, and so you won't get any fantasy points. I do hope that Daniel Jones comes back around. One of the things about drafting Wan'Dale Robinson is that you can make the claim that suddenly now you have built that in. McCollum Shipley there, I think, too much upside, a poor final season. He was one of these players who wasn't a freshman season like the freshman season that Braylon Allen had, but the peripherals as a freshman in college were very impressive. The volume was there. We know he's got the athleticism. We know he has this hybrid skill set. Questions about Clemson, which I'm sure when he signed up to be a part of that team, he wasn't thinking like this squad is going to be a squad that hurts me as I'm trying to develop my pro prospects. Obviously, at this range of the draft, you have a very wide potential range, but I think that he's the guy where a year from now, what you're going to hear is like everyone's going to say they saw it coming. Everyone's going to say that they thought Shipley, should have been going earlier. And I mean, a lot of people will be correct with that because he's someone who obviously was a big Devy name. And so a lot of dynasty managers, a lot of draft addicts who have been following these guys for years, will have lots of shares. They certainly want that to come to fruition in order for those shares to be worth something. Maybe it's just the shares that I have and this idea of chasing the profile that scores so well, but I don't want to be underweight on Shipley before the bounce, if there's a bounce, because at that point, you'll have lost some of this value you could have had of just having so many free shares. And the other side of it is that when you're talking about these basically free shares, if you do miss, which again is still very much a likely outcome, it doesn't hurt you as much as it will once he becomes trendy later. Because the problem that you have once a back becomes trendy is that there's still a huge amount of risk. You can still miss on him. You prefer to miss on him at this price. Yeah,
the other thing, just as Shawn was talking, that did come back around, we got Daniel Jones, but with the running backs that we have and with rookies at this time of the year in general, obviously we're about a month out from the NFL draft, But this is the best time to be drafting those rookies prior to knowing those landing spots based on their ADP likely to rise post NFL draft. And it can feel like when you're, for example, we're drafting here and also Troy Franklin in the mix. When you're drafting them over on Underdog, for example, at the moment you're getting a kind of a silhouette of a circle. It's not a real picture of a person, and it can sometimes feel like you're not really drafting a player, but these are going to be NFL players in 4 weeks time, and they're also then going to be playing in the NFL this season. So don't be afraid to click on those names, even though it feels like there's uncertainty as to where they will be or who they will be playing for. There's a lot of these guys who have team names beside them who will be bumped down depth charts that may feel like safer options at this particular stage of the draft season than if you go ahead and take some of the rookies and the upside along with that as well. So we are one pick away, Shawn. We have 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. What is taking your fancy here for these next couple of rounds is to seal this team out?
Well, I think that my dream scenario would be able to land Nick's Abanikanda and the Kansas State tight end prospect. All of them have later ADPs. Colm, do you have a must draft here?
Don't have you can hit me with the preference. We made the pitches for the rookies, so let's go with a rookie anyway.
So we add Nix. In my dream scenario, he ends up being the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. That's not the scuttlebutt currently, right? The rumors are not pushing in that direction.
That's our backdoor stack, our first round pick in Justin Jefferson, getting the stack in the 18th round. That's the other part of this plan that we come up with before the show.
It is. That is the dream scenario. It appears that the Minnesota Vikings are going to try and move into the top 5 to draft a quarterback who handed off in college. The last time that a team did that, you got Trey Lance, but pattern matching to one player is certainly not going to give you the answers that you need. Again, when he was asked to come through on the key 3rd and mediums, 3rd and longs for his team to win a national title, McCarthy did that. We're certainly not suggesting that he couldn't be the guy as we go forward. I just want this Minnesota Vikings passing offense to be high volume, Colm, and that's the thing that is so disappointing right now. When you're looking at Justin Jefferson pick 7, you're thinking,
be honest here with the listeners. We just want all 32 NFL offenses to be high volume passing offenses. We do. Colm,
last night I watched the University of Kansas barely hold on, unfortunately, due to a little bit of a bad call there on more or less the final possession. Sanford had clawed back from 22 down to make it 90-89. The only relevance here is that that 93-89 game for Kansas was the most fun game all season. I can't tell you how much I hate defense. I can't tell you how much I hate low-scoring games in all sports. Let's get some shootouts in the 40s.
Give us the points. We want the points.
Yeah. So, Colm here, Abanikanda not necessarily getting drafted, but I think probably a guy who should be. He's still someone I think could be a very trendy sleeper. We don't want Breece Hall to have anything happen there. But one of the things we discussed last offseason is that this offense that the Jets likely want to run with their offensive coordinator, with their QB, we won't even say his name, has often delivered a huge number of points to the running back too, even when the running back 1 was a borderline star. Now, I just don't know how many carries and touches you can legitimately take away from Breece Hall, but if this offense is a juggernaut and Colm, they could score a lot of points. Then someone with Abanikanda's speed, his ability to create the big play, he's the perfect understudy to Breece Hall here.
The ideal situation in New York is that it's pretty much a 2-back committee with it being 70-30 split. And right at this point of the draft in the 19th round, that is a great return if you had Abanikanda. What you don't want is to have 2 guys behind Breece Hall and then Abanikanda has nothing. What you also don't want is Breece Hall to get injured, which isn't also possible. But again, if you're drafting Abanikanda, that could work. But I think the 2 of those guys and that offense and the work concentrated between them is what you'd be hoping for with that particular selection. A lot of positivity, obviously, and a lot of reports when he was drafted last year. And unfortunately, drafting to the Jets felt like one of those ones where, anywhere else, and we would have loved what would have happened. And because we wanted success for Hall, that limited maybe some of the hope and optimism going into the season for Abanikanda. But it didn't really work out for him, but it didn't work out for a lot of the Jets based on the fact for the player that you want to have redacted from the show got injured on the first play of the season last year and then couldn't play the entire year. And, we had just I don't know what you want to call the quarterback scenario with the Jets in 2023. So hopefully it's going to be better this year, and that should lead for more opportunities for, the entire roster, but also those running backs. So Abanikanda added into the mix as well. And, how are you feeling now with the running back room as it's starting to shape out those rookies with, we have obviously Jaylen Warren and thinking back, Shawn, that's a half an hour ago. I'm trying to think of the players that we did draft.
Yeah, well, you have two low to middle RB1s potentially in Jaylen Warren and Raheem.
Tell me
Mostert,
his name, Shawn. I have completely Raheem Mostert. I was just thinking of Miami Dolphins RB2. I could not get a name to come into my mind as it completely disowned me. But how are you feeling with the balance there?
Good. I mean, you take the three rookies, they could all three go into bad spots. They could all three be busts. Maybe you don't get the health from Brooks. Maybe teams' unwillingness to actually, deploy Marshawn Lloyd is the keynote that you want there. Maybe Will Shipley is, somebody who could even end up, going toward the end of day 3 and, buried on a depth chart. But when you're looking at rookies who have this athleticism, have the electricity, have the ability to not just be filler, right? To be guys who we're talking about in late August as being 6th or 7th round picks because they've so completely blown up at camp, then, those are the types of names you're looking for. And then they don't even necessarily have to blow up a camp. They just need to make the team. They need to play reasonably well. And then when the opportunity presents itself, because sadly, we're going to get a lot of injuries at the running back position again, do they take the job and run with it? Are they the type of players who have a hybrid skill set? I really like these three guys. It would have been nice to get one more intriguing veteran. I didn't feel like the board really fell that way for us here. So we didn't force it. One of the things about a pure zero RB team is that you should have a little bit of discomfort, but there's only so much discomfort you can have when you have two, clear-cut starters with massive touchdown upside, and then you've got a lot of talent behind those players.
Yeah, and you mentioned there should be some discomfort. There will be, but then that can be eased if you take a nice, a dosage of healthy wide receiver drafting in those first 5 rounds when you reflect back on who we have here. So we have Justin Jefferson, Rashee Rice, Jaylen Waddle, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers to start. Then we have 2 tight ends. Maybe would have liked to, have a Trey McBride and Dalton Kincaid versus what we got, but I think the way the draft played out, it worked out fine. Kyle Pitts would maybe be another consideration. Brock Bowers, Shawn, was somebody who you mentioned who went 2 picks before us on that Njoku selection. But now we know that we have stacked up the Cleveland Browns here a little bit. All works out in the end. But we are set up pretty nicely at wide receiver. Running back then, we start to get into Jaylen Warren, Raheem Mostert, Jonathan Brooks, getting the rookie in the mix. And it felt like at that point there could have been some ways that the running back room could have fell to us. But we got the first 2 and Warren and Mostert, who were targets that we did really want to get. How are you feeling at that particular point of the draft? And I know I kind of leaned this towards the Justin Jefferson pick. Any of those selections of the wide receivers in those early rounds that you may have looked to change?
No, I don't think so. There are some other good options there, and yet the players that we actually have are the most fun, the most dynamic. We talked about Jaylen Waddle on a previous show and kind of his relevance as a buy low type of piece. One of the things I did want to mention there is that Jaylen Waddle is a little bit older maybe than it seems because he entered the NFL at an advanced age. Yeah. I think that some dynasty managers were probably listening to that show and thinking, like, Shawn, he's already in that range that you're telling us to sell. And that is the case, right? So you want to be aware of that when you have a chance, when there is someone who is saying, okay, I'm willing to discount the frustrating parts of last season and pay that other price. I mean, he's a player to potentially sell as
He's
well.
also getting drafted in the range where like Diggs, Adams, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, Mike Evans are going. So they're beyond
right. So I mean, I think he's a great value. I just wanted to make that point because that was something that, as I left the previous show, I thought maybe was a little bit misleading. Also noted that his connection to Mike McDaniel, and I think I may have said Mike McDonald, that's going to be one that will be a tough error to not make as we go through this season. Those names similar enough sounding in my head that hopefully we usually get the right one on the show. Give both of those guys their unique credit for what they have accomplished. Colm, the other thing, as we recorded today, the news over the last 24, 48 hours is that Odell Beckham could land there. And that for me is something where it's like, that just consolidates the volume for Jaylen Waddle. If you've seen anything from Odell Beckham recently, it's that he can no longer command targets. Ideally, he would draw a little bit of coverage and make it easier on Waddle. I think that could actually play to his favor. T. Higgins, you hope he stops dropping those passes. We saw a couple games at the end of the season where he makes that sensational touchdown. That's the type of play you're looking for there. I mean, I frankly just don't understand Zay Flowers' price at all. At this point, I kind of think there's some big element that I'm completely missing. And so we'll continue to search for that element because we don't want to keep telling you to draft him. If that element exists.
Possibly.
But he should be a third-round pick, right? I mean, this is 2 rounds after where he should be going.
I think he goes back-to-back in this draft with him and Mark Andrews, and I think maybe some of the consideration for people maybe not watching as much of the games is like, well, what he did was done, with Mark Andrews out, so he was getting, volume or opportunities based on that. But I think when you watch what he was able to do last season, it improved from the start of the season through the end of the season. The way that he used him changed throughout that portion of time as well. And you're having a player now coming into his second season who's already impressed as a rookie, who, should be the wide receiver 1 on that roster. And you even mentioned Odell Beckham, and those targets, are freed up. There'll be certain opportunities going his way. But I think people are maybe just thinking of Mark Andrews being back. And I know Lamar Jackson won the MVP, but people tend to still think of the Baltimore Ravens as a team that just wants to go on the ground. So I think there's a lot of discounts being put into Zay Flowers that shouldn't really be there.
Yeah, like I said, we'll keep searching for what that piece is because to me, he looks like a 2-3 turn type of pick. And then, Colm, we did get the 2 tight ends. I'm excited for that. It would have been more fun to get Bowers, whom I believe is like the greatest tight end prospect ever.
I think since Sam Laporta, is that right? The greatest tight end.
Well, I mean, he's not going to be as good as Sam Laporta because Sam Laporta came in with that 99th percentile outcome, and congratulations to him for doing it. That was the 2 best things of 2023 were Rashee Rice and Sam Laporta. We'll hope to hit on a few more like that for 2024.
Sam Laporta, the player that when you had 75% exposure, it just wasn't enough exposure.
It just wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. You needed to keep drafting him. David Njoku, one of 7 players last year to average 10-plus points in the half PPR scoring. He finished the season extremely hot. That final month, he goes off for, just under 19 points a game in half PPR. Now, one of the things that does stand out there is when he's freed up from the shackles of Deshaun Watson, who, we do very sadly have on this team. But this could be a case where we were hoping for Bowers, and yet having Njoku instead is the key piece. I mean, Njoku could be the guy who is the tight end league winner in 2024. Many times it's those picks that you were disappointed in. The 2 guys we really wanted went right before our pick, right? Bowers and then JSN, the slot right before us. Then we get the running backs. We get Jerry Jeudy and Troy Franklin. We love those prices. We get Wan'Dale Robinson. We get the 3 QBs, all of whom have mobility. It'll be interesting to see if Nix actually generates any rushing value at the NFL level. And then, Colm, I'm just going to throw this out here because we do like to do a hot take at minute 56. Make sure that there's something there for anybody who listens to the end. In round 20, we drafted the 2024 Sam Laporta. There's a little bit on that in the RotoViz Rookie Guide. There will be more on that as we move through the dynasty offseason here. But Colm, we'll leave that nugget out there and build on that in future content.
Yeah, so that's just for anyone who has stayed along the way. Just a future note: don't turn the podcast off before it's over. Shawn might throw a hot take out in the the second to last minute of the show. But I think in general, Shawn, team that with the challenges that we had at quarterback, you mentioned Deshaun Watson, but then Daniel Jones-Bo next later on in the draft, and we get Marshawn Lloyd, Troy Franklin, Wandale Robinson, Will Shipley, and then Abanikanda, and finishing it off at tight end then to seal it out. But I think overall, and I didn't mention Jerry Jeudy there as well in the mix. We had mentioned him previously. I think it's a very intriguing team that has a lot of high upside. There is going to be the challenges of both quarterback and running back, but post NFL draft, we could be saying there's not very many challenges here at running back if we have two of those three guys land in an opportune spot, and then the team just takes it to another level. You mentioned earlier in the show trying to just build out the strongest team pre the NFL draft, and I think with what we've done here today, there's an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and if nothing else, this was a fun team. This type of construction is going to be one that we lean into fairly heavily for 2024. It won't be the only type of thing that we do, but we've had some questions about what pockets of the draft are we targeting certain positions, who are our must draft players at this juncture, who are some of our sleepers. I think that this particular draft at least gives a beginning look at all of those questions. And as I said, it was a blast.
Yeah, it was an awesome time. So again, if you want to sign up over at Underdog Fantasy, you can use the promo code RotoViz to get yourself a 100% sign-up bonus up to $100. If you're signing up over at RotoViz.com and you want to get a 10% discount off your 1-year NFL pass, you get access to all of the content and tools on RotoViz.com. Use the code RVRadio2024. That will get you that 10% discount. We have some fun guests lined up over the next couple of weeks, and we're excited to bring them to you. So make sure you are subscribed to get all those shows once they're available. We'll be talking NFL draft next week with Travis May. Looking forward to that. And Pat Curry and Matt Hicks and more lined up over the coming weeks. So check back. Lots of shows coming your way. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host, as always, is Shawn Siegele. And until we are back, have a good one.